to sleep horror, where the line between dreams and nightmares fades. Tonight, we delve into tales that creep in when you close your eyes, stories that will haunt your sleep long after the screen goes dark. Grab your blankets, turn down the lights, and prepare to confront the shadows lurking just beyond your eyelids. Let's begin. Story 1. I'm 27 and work in shipping at a warehouse just outside Asheville. Whenever life starts to feel like a never-ending loop, I head out on a solo hike. No earbuds, no companions, just me, my gear, and miles of silent trail. It's not about exercise, but about having space to think. October is the perfect time. It's not too hot. Most bugs are gone and the crowds thin out once the school year starts. I'd already tackled sections of the Appalachian Trail before, some of the more popular stretches in North Carolina and Tennessee. But this time, I wanted something off the beaten path, something you wouldn't find tagged on Instagram or listed in a travel blog. Elevation numbers and scenic overlooks didn't matter. I simply wanted to disappear for a while. Years ago, I bookmarked a post on an old backpacking forum by someone calling themselves Crawl 73. Back in 2011, they described a forgotten feeder trail somewhere near Baxter, Kentucky, up in Harlan County. According to them, it was technically public land, but it was no longer maintained. No markers, no updated maps, nothing official. If you stayed on it long enough, it looped back into a main trail. They called it the cleanest silence I ever heard. That line stuck with me. I searched everywhere for any follow-up, photos, maps, trip reports, but found nothing beyond that single thread. Even so, it sounded doable. I marked the approximate spot on my offline map, packed 3 days' worth of food and supplies, and drove up there on Saturday morning. As I got closer, the roads narrowed. Pavement gave way to gravel and gravel to dirt. Eventually, I spotted a stretch just wide enough to pull over, with a 10-foot wide gap where brush had been pressed down, just enough to suggest someone had come through recently. Or maybe not so recently. I killed the engine, sat for a moment, and stepped into the stillness. No other vehicles, no trail markers, no signs of any kind. Perfect. I hoisted my pack, locked the car, and set off. The first miles were exactly what I expected. Dense woods, a faint path, and tree roots ready to twist an ankle at any moment. It didn't feel hostile, just like I'd wandered into somewhere I wasn't meant to know about. Not forbidden, but definitely not mine. About 5 miles in, I saw the first sign. A small wooden board nailed to a tree at shoulder height, roughly 6 inches wide, the edges worn smooth. 7 was carved into it in neat, simple letters. No arrow, no blaze, just that number. I paused, snapped a picture, and kept it going, thinking maybe someone was marking mileage backward or it was part of a local loop. Backpackers often leave cryptic things behind. 40 or 50 minutes later, I came across another, 6. The same type of board, same size, same hand-carved lettering. But this one was nailed lower, nearer the ground. That's when I realized I hadn't seen anything else for miles. No boot prints, no discarded cans, no wildlife sounds. Just silence so complete, I could hear the click of my hydration tube as I walked. Unconsciously, I slowed down and started glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. Not because I thought someone was there, but because I felt I should be checking. Then I reached the marker 5. This board wasn't nailed to a tree. It was simply propped upright against the base of a dead V-shaped trunk. The number was carved deeply and roughly, as if someone had done it fast and hard. The wood looked slithering. It didn't belong. I turned around, scanning the forest, but saw nothing. No breeze, no movement. Only that oppressive quiet where even your own breath seems loud. I didn't linger at 5, but moved on quickly. Soon after, I found 4. This one was painted in thick, uneven dark red, almost like blood, slathered on in a hurry. The board was nailed crooked into a stump, leaning left. As I stepped past it, I felt a sudden pop in my nose, like a shift in pressure, and then blood poured out without warning. A hot, wet trickle over my upper lip. I stumbled back, wiping frantically, and felt my ears ring as if I stood under high voltage. My hands shook as I fumbled for my water bottle and washed my palms. I crouched, trying to slow my breathing and prevent a panic spiral. I told myself I'd soon camp, find a flat spot before sundown, then hike out at first light. I wasn't trapped, just off course. I located a small clearing about 20 feet off the trail and set up my tent. No fire. It simply didn't feel right. I sat with my back against a tree, snacked on a granola bar, and stared at the path as if it might suddenly move. My phone hadn't buzzed once. GPS had died hours ago, stuck on a map I'd already walked past. No signal, no updates. Eventually, I fell asleep unintentionally. I blinked, and I was out. At precisely 1:12 a.m., I woke in a panic, checked my watch out of habit, as if afraid I'd missed something. There was no sound, no movement, only my racing heart. Then, I heard footsteps. Not fast, not loud, just one step every few seconds. Slow, pacing around my tent. I held my breath, utterly still, not daring even a twitch. Suddenly, a voice spoke in a flat, even tone. Not a whisper, not a shout, just stated, as if reading a name from a roll call. I couldn't move or answer. I was frozen. Then, again from the opposite side, the exact same voice, same tone, as if someone had recorded it and was playing it back perfectly. I stayed that way until light began filtering through the dense nylon. When I finally unzipped and stepped outside, the woods looked normal again, still and empty. That's when I noticed a new board leaning against a nearby tree. 3. Beneath the number, faint but unmistakable, was my name. I didn't eat or think. I packed up in a rush and started moving fast. No trail snacks, no pacing. But something about the trail felt off. The trees were closer together. The turns didn't match my memory. I wasn't retracing my steps. I was walking into something entirely different. I tried checking my map, but the blue dot stayed frozen. Then, directly overhead, I saw a board hanging from a twine noose from a branch. I hadn't noticed it until I walked right under it. I knocked it down with my trekking pole. The back was damp, covered in tiny, irregular holes, like bite marks. I didn't stop to look. I kept running. After that, the forest grew stranger. The ground felt spongy. Some trees had blackened trunks, yet the surrounding foliage wasn't scorched. I caught glimpses of something moving, an ankle peeking from behind a tree, a shoulder bobbing away. But every time I sprinted forward, there was nothing. Then I stumbled upon one, just a splinter of wood jammed into the dirt, with my name again, this time branded in black and smelling sharply of burnt plastic. I lost it, yelling, "Who's there? What do you want?" But only silence answered. Glancing back, I saw something vanish among the trees. No human shape, definitely wrong. Limbs jerking too fast and out of sync. I didn't wait to look again. I tore through the underbrush and came upon a massive fallen log, where someone had painted 0 in fresh, glistening letters. I stepped over it, and instantly the air grew thick and heavy, as though I waded through water. A few feet ahead, bare footprints my size appeared, then stopped after a handful of steps. I didn't hesitate. I crashed through branches until I emerged into a clearing with power lines overhead. I followed the wires for what felt like hours until I finally reached a dirt road. A park ranger's truck rolled by, and I flagged him down, telling him I got lost on an old side trail and needed help getting back to my car. I didn't mention the boards. He said nobody used that trail for over a decade. It wasn't even on state maps anymore. That night, back home, I reviewed the photo I took of 7. Sure enough, the board and the forum thread both existed, but I still have the 0 board stashed in my closet. It reeks of burnt chemicals, and lately, every few nights, I dream I'm back in those woods, standing before that board. But the number painted on it isn't 0 anymore. It's my name, Story 2. I'm Aaron, and I hadn't set foot in Willow Ridge, Kentucky since I left for college at 19. I always told people it was because life got busy. Work, relationships, adult responsibilities. But the real reason was that I didn't want to return to a place where everyone knew exactly who I was, who my parents were, and whether my porch light stayed on past midnight. In a small town, you couldn't sneeze without it becoming Sunday's gossip at church. Then, my cousin Lainey called to tell me Grandma Jean had died, and her house needed to be emptied out. I figured it would take a couple days, sort through the junk, pack up the photo albums, grab a few sentimental items, and get back on the road before anyone turned it into a big hometown spectacle. I threw a few pairs of jeans, a hoodie, and half a bottle of Advil into a duffel and drove up. The trip felt oddly off, not sad or nostalgic, just strange. The roads hadn't changed in years, and each turn still felt painfully familiar. I cracked the windows and a rush of honeysuckle hit me. Suddenly, I was punched by memories I wasn't ready to face. The house looked exactly like I remembered, chipped, pale blue siding, a porch swing hanging by one rusty chain that creaked as if it might snap. The yard appeared mowed just enough to keep the county inspectors at bay, more out of obligation than affection. The front door still stuck at the threshold. You had to give it a solid hip check to force it open. I chuckled, because Grandma used to curse at that door every single time. Inside, the air was heavy with the same scents I remembered: cedar, old laundry soap, and a faint hint of mothballs. I dropped my bag in my old bedroom and just stood there, absorbing it all. The twin bed was still pushed against the far wall, covered with the same faded quilt. The closet door hung slightly off its hinge, and the window never sealed completely, letting in a draft. It was like stepping into an old photograph, one that wove my awkward teenage years right into the wallpaper. That first night, sleep didn't come. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it clicked with each rotation. The next morning, I noticed the hallway mirror outside the bathroom. It had an oval, brass-colored frame that used to be decorated with tacky plastic roses, hot glued around the edge. Probably a middle school craft of Grandma's. But those roses were gone. I walked past and caught something odd in the mirror. When I raised my hand, the reflection trailed behind by a split second. Not a full-on glitch, but enough to make me step back. I tried again, reached out, and the mirrored hand followed just a moment late, like it was sizing me up before responding. I told myself it was just the way the morning light hit the glass, or that I simply hadn't had coffee yet. I didn't think more of it until much later that night, around midnight, when I heard the back door creak I hadn't touched that door since I'd arrived. It had one of those old locks that jam unless you yank it, so I knew I wasn't the one messing with it. I grabbed Grandma's old storm flashlight from under the sink and crept into the kitchen. The wooden door was cracked open just a few inches, but the screen door was still latched. I stepped onto the porch, and the light above me started to flicker. Out in the yard, the trees moved, but there was no breeze. Something low to the ground, but upright, neither animal nor person, darted past. Its gait was strange, almost like it hadn't quite mastered how to walk, its shoulders jerking with each step, as though it were stuffed into a bad costume. Then it vanished behind the small tool shed. I stayed frozen for a minute before locking the door and spending the rest of the night in the living room, TV on low, just for noise. The next morning, I went out to see if I'd imagined it. I was halfway through my coffee when I noticed 5 dead birds arranged in a perfect circle on the grass. No blood, no mess, just laid out neatly, one by one. I didn't touch them. I just stood there, mug in hand, hoping for a logical explanation that never came. I called Lainey and asked if Grandma had been acting strange before she died. After a long pause, she said quietly, "Did she ever tell you about that mirror in the hallway?" I stayed silent. "It started showing her things," Lainey said. "Things that weren't real. Or at least, not real yet." Apparently, Grandma had covered the mirror during her final months and refused to walk past it. That night, I tried the same tactic. Threw a towel over the mirror. 10 minutes later, it was lying on the floor. I chalked it up to gravity and taped it back up, but the tape peeled off as if heated. No snapping noise, just slowly coming loose. Finally, I turned the mirror completely around to face the wall. Around 3 a.m., I woke up choking on a rancid smell, like something furry and wet had rotted inside the walls, mixed with vinegar. Half dazed, I stumbled into the hallway. The mirror was facing the room again, and it wasn't reflecting the hallway. It showed a damaged house, peeling wallpaper, hanging light fixtures, waterlogged carpet that looked like the place had been abandoned for years. Then I saw me step out of that reflection. Same hair, same hoodie, but the smile, it stretched impossibly wide, and the eyes didn't blink. The teeth were far too long, grotesquely elongated. She just stood there, grinning, unmoving. I bolted, no shoes, no phone, burst out the front door, and ran until I reached the old church at the end of the road. It was boarded up and crumbling. The bell tower had collapsed sometime in the last decade. I sat on the stone steps, feeling relief. It was empty in a good way, like whatever was in that house didn't bother with holy ground. When the sky began to pale with morning light, I returned. The front door was wide open. My duffel bag lay zipped and packed on the porch. No footprints, no evidence someone had come inside. I grabbed it and left it immediately. But as I passed the hallway, I glanced at the mirror. The towel was on the floor. The glass was pristine, and my reflection stood there normally. No lag, no twisted grin, just me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shoulder and fingers reaching behind the reflection, as if trying to grab me. I didn't look again. I never bring up Willow Ridge anymore. Lainey put Grandma's house up for sale. As is, cash only, no inspections. She said she didn't even set foot inside. She just handed the keys to the realtor and walked away. Story 3. This occurred back when I was employed by the Park Service near Winslow Ridge in West Virginia, not far from the Green Hollow Preserve. It wasn't one of those high-stakes jobs. No daring rescues or tense bear encounters. Most days were spent walking trails, noting broken signs and making sure campers stayed on the marked paths. It was peaceful work, repetitive in a way I actually appreciated. No surprises. I'd heard the usual local lore, of course. Every Appalachian town has its tales, but I never paid them much mind, assuming they were just folklore passed around by people who'd lived there for ages. Then, in late September 2021, my supervisor drew my attention to an old fire tower mentioned in an internal memo, one that hadn't been used in decades and wasn't even on the public trail maps. It sat tucked beyond a ridge called Potter's Spine. My task was straightforward. Hike up, take some photographs, note its condition, and return. They were debating whether to tear it down. I set out early that morning, parked at the trailhead, and began hiking around 10 a.m. The trail started off easy, with a gentle slope, a thick canopy overhead, and solid footing. I remember thinking how crisp the air smelled that day, like dry leaves mixed with a faint metallic tang. It wasn't unpleasant, just sharp. I carried my usual kit: camera, field notebook, compass, flashlight, radio, and my sidearm, standard gear. I checked in with dispatch before heading in, and everything felt normal. About a mile in, something odd happened. The blue trail markers simply vanished. Normally, you'd see one every 10 trees or so, but the last one I noticed was a faded smudge on a beech tree. After that, nothing. I walked in slow circles, trying to locate another marker, but came up empty-handed. I assumed whether or where had erased them, yet it unnerved me, like I'd inadvertently stepped off the map. I reached the tower around 2:45 p.m. It looked decrepit. The base leaned to one side and the stairs were visibly rotting. I didn't climb right away. Instead, I circled the perimeter, snapped some photos, and jotted down notes. The forest around the tower was strangely bare. No fallen branches, no footprints, just packed dirt and an eerie dead silence. That was the first thing that made me pause. It wasn't a calm silence. It was a total absence of sound, as if the woods had muted themselves. Then I heard something crack to my left, like a footstep. I spun around, expecting maybe a deer or a raccoon, but saw nothing, only trees. I called out, "Park Service, is anyone here?" Still silence. Then another crack, closer this time. I stepped toward the sound, scanning the trees, but nothing moved. The quiet was so thick it felt unnatural. I backed off and decided to get the photos done quickly. The stairs groaned under my weight as if urging me not to climb, but I went up anyway. Inside, the lookout room was revolting. Mold-covered, broken gear scattered everywhere, dust coating every surface. I grabbed a few quick shots with my camera, then approached the window facing the way I'd hiked in. That's when I saw it. Something tall and dark standing just inside the tree line, down the ridge, right where the trail curved out of sight. It didn't resemble a person or an animal, just a long, shadowy form, like someone had stood a dark cloak upright and left it there. I raised my binoculars, but before I could focus, it moved, slid behind a tree in one fluid, unnatural motion, too smooth and too silent. I stayed up there for at least 20 minutes, maybe more, peering through the trees over and over. Nothing shifted. Finally, I made my way down, much more cautiously, checking each step twice. The way the turns fell and the way trees leaned felt off, as though the forest had subtly reshaped itself while I was in the tower. I checked my map, convinced something wasn't right. And then it appeared again, right ahead on the trail, maybe 50 yards away. The same tall figure. No face, no definable features, just that stretched black shape, arms hanging too low, legs too long, standing perfectly still. I froze and watched. It didn't move. I grabbed my radio. Potter Tower, base to dispatch. Do you copy? Only static. I fiddled with the dial and tried again. Dispatch, this is base. I need assistance. Do you copy? Still just static. I dropped the radio and looked up. It had vanished. Not walking away, not hiding, simply not there anymore. I didn't break into a run, but I picked up the pace. My compass spun wildly like a broken toy, so I gave up on it, doing my best to stay on what I hoped was the trail. That's when I noticed a tree I'd passed before, marked by a streak of blue paint down its side. I went past it again, and the third time I saw deep claw marks gouged into the bark, large, thick, as if something had purposely been dragged across the tree. No bear or wildcat around there had claws like that. Then came footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, matching my own pace. I stopped. They stopped. I moved. They moved. I drew my sidearm and held it low, ready, my fingers trembling. Then I heard it breathe, moist, not deep, not loud, like air being forced through water or some hole. It was the kind of sound you don't want to believe comes from anything alive. Without hesitation, I bolted, crashing through underbrush, sliding over rocks. At some point, I caught my foot on a root and went down hard, my shoulder slamming into a tree. I managed to get up and kept running. My backpack snagged on something and tore loose, but I left it behind when I spotted the silver sheen of my truck's windshield through the trees. I nearly lost it, sprinting the rest of the way, keys already in hand. I jumped in, slammed the door, locked everything, and sat there for a minute, shaking, heart pounding, trying not to drop the keys. Then I looked up and there it was, standing at the tree line, right off the trail, visible without any attempt at concealment. It just watched me. It didn't come closer or retreat, just stood as I started the engine and sped away. I didn't stop until I was back at the ranger station. I reported that the tower was a hazard, the trail was unstable, and that access needed to be closed. They agreed. No further questions. About 3 weeks later, I received an email about a missing hiker in the same area. No sign of him. Just his dog, which somehow found its way back to the trailhead. I didn't respond to the email. I never went back to help. I haven't been within miles of Potter's Spine since. Story 4. I'm a 34-year-old wildlife biologist, and for the past decade, I've been surveying big mammals, black bears, elk, bobcats, across the southern Appalachians and western North Carolina. My work usually involves slogging through remote backcountry trails, setting up camera traps, and downloading GPS collar information. I've honestly spent more nights in a tent than in my own bed, and I've grown to prefer it that way. The forest used to feel like home, orderly, predictable. Last summer, however, I was assigned a new study area just west of Klingman's Dome. It was a 2-week solo assignment. Check camera traps, retrieve collar data, and record field observations. The place was extremely remote. Thick underbrush, steep slopes, almost 0 foot traffic. I liked that level of isolation, so I packed light, filled my rucksack with freeze-dried meals, and hit the trail right after dawn. The first 2 days went without incident. I collected elk collar data, and my GPS tracks all looked normal. On day 3, I hiked back to first camera I'd installed in April. The unit was still attached to the tree, but it looked like something had grabbed it and bashed it into the ground repeatedly. Cracked plastic, ruined lens, shredded SD card. I assumed a bear had torn it apart. Bears will trash equipment, especially if anything smells like food or salt. 8 miles later, I reached the second camera. This one was intact, so I swapped the SD card, backed up the footage to my tablet, and sat down to eat lunch while reviewing the clips. Most of the footage was typical. Deer wandering by, a turkey strutting, a fox sniffing the camera lens. Then I found a clip that made my stomach knot. It began with a raccoon wandering into view, but about 30 seconds later, something else appeared. A naked man coated head to toe in dried mud. His skin looked distorted, stretched taut over his ribs and joints. He stood sideways to the camera, motionless, head tilted up as if listening for something miles off. After about 20 seconds, he dropped to all fours and crawled out of frame. The way he moved wasn't human. It was jerky, frantic, like his limbs didn't bend properly. I told myself it was probably a lost or disoriented hiker under the influence of something, but that didn't make sense. Who hikes naked through that terrain in the middle of the night? That evening, I made camp at Cold Spring Gap. I kept my fire burning longer than usual, trying to shake the image of that creature. Around 2 a.m., I heard soft footsteps circling my tent, just light, cautious movements. I sat up, grabbed my headlamp and my bear spray, then unzipped the tent and stepped out. I shone the beam around the clearing, but there was nothing there, just absolute silence. I couldn't dismiss the feeling that something was watching from the tree line. I never slept that night. The next morning, I hiked to retrieve the third camera trap. I knew exactly where I'd mounted it. Same birch tree, same bracket. But when I arrived, the camera was gone, removed so cleanly that even the lockbox was missing. No signs of animal damage, no scrape marks on the bark, no footprints in the dirt. Nothing but a spotless mount. It wasn't an animal. Whoever took it had done so deliberately. At that point, I decided I'd had enough. I skipped lunch, packed up, and began the return journey. My GPS estimated about 6 hours back to the ranger station. I didn't plan on stopping until I reached my truck, but halfway down the trail, it constricted onto a rocky ridgeline with steep drop-offs on both sides. I noticed movement in my peripheral vision, about 50 feet below me on the slope, something pacing alongside the ridge through the trees. I paused. It paused. I took another step. It mirrored mine. When I stopped again and peered down, I glimpsed a faint, human-shaped figure weaving between the trunks. That was all I needed. I didn't stop again. I powered onto the truck and didn't let myself breathe until I was inside with the doors locked. Back at the ranger station, I made my report. My supervisor guessed it was a squatter living off-grid and asked me to upload the footage. I handed over the destroyed camera and the clips, but no one followed up. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that crawling man matching my pace without making a sound. Over the next week, I pulled footage from nearby cameras, just to see if I could find any clue. Most of it was unremarkable wildlife, until I came across one clip from a trail 6 miles west of my loop. It was even more disturbing. 3 figures, covered in the same dried mud, roughly the same build. They stood just beyond the infrared's reach. One of them stepped forward slowly, as if testing whether the camera could detect him. Then he crouched until his face was almost touching the lens. tilted his head sideways as if listening, and pressed his ear right against it. He lingered like that for a moment, then flashed a grin that was grotesque. Too wide, too many teeth, before the feed abruptly cut out. That camera, too, stopped transmitting. A week later, a technician went to inspect that mount. The bracket was still in place, but again, the camera had been taken. A few months passed, and I got quietly reassigned. No explanations. 2 months ago, I was standing in line at an outdoor gear store in Asheville, waiting to buy a new camp stove. The guy behind me struck up a conversation, and we traded trail stories. He mentioned a solo overnight trip to Fontana Lake and said he'd woken up in the night to the sound of people crawling all around his tent. No walking, just crawling, circling it for almost an hour. He never saw them. He just heard fast, ragged breathing moving in circles outside. At dawn, he found streaks of wet brown mud smeared around his campsite. I didn't say a word. I just paid for my gear and walked out. I haven't set foot in those woods since. Story 5. I'm 34 and have spent the last decade working as a wildlife biologist in western North Carolina, mostly tracking large mammals, black bears, elk, bobcats, through the southern Appalachians. My days and nights are spent hiking seldom used backcountry trails, installing camera traps, and downloading GPS collar data. Honestly, I've slept more often under canvas than in my own bed, and I've always felt at home in the woods until last summer. I was assigned a new 2-week solo survey zone, just west of Clingman's Dome. My task was straightforward: check on camera traps, collect collar readings, and jot down field observations. The region was exceptionally remote, dense undergrowth, steep slopes, almost no sign of other hikers, and I welcomed the isolation. I packed light, dehydrated meals, satellite radio, a flare gun, solar charger, and a backup GPS, then set out at first light. The first 2 days were completely uneventful. I retrieved elk collar data, and my GPS track logs looked flawless. But on day 3, when I returned to the first camera I'd installed back in April, I discovered it in ruins. Still affixed to the tree, yes, but its plastic housing smashed, lens shattered, and memory card shredded. I assumed a bear had mauled it. Bears often demolish anything that smells like food or salt. About 8 miles later, I reached the second camera. It was intact, so I swapped the SD card, backed up the footage to my tablet, and settled down to eat lunch while reviewing the clips. Most of what I saw was standard: deer meandering by, a turkey strutting into view, even a fox sniffing at the lens. Then I stumbled on a clip that curled my stomach. A raccoon wandered in, but 30 seconds later another figure appeared. An unclothed man caked head to toe in dried mud. His skin looked unnaturally stretched over his ribs and joints. He paused sideways to the camera, head tipped back as if straining to hear something far off. After 20 seconds, he dropped to all fours and crawled out of frame. The motion wasn't human, jerky, twitchy, as though his limbs refused to articulate correctly. I tried rationalizing it as a lost or intoxicated hiker, but there was no reason anyone would hike naked through that terrain in the dead of night. That evening, I camped at a clearing known as Cold Spring Gap. I kept my fire burning long after dusk, trying to erase that unsettling image. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps circling my tent, soft, deliberate snaps of broken sticks. I sat bolt upright, grabbed my headlamp and bear spray, then unzipped the tent and peered out. I swept the beam across the clearing but saw nothing. just an eerie stillness that felt as though something watched from the shadows. I never slept another minute. The following morning, I trudged to the third camera trap site, confident I'd recall the exact birch tree and bracket where I'd mounted it. But when I arrived, the camera had vanished, removed so cleanly that even its steel lockbox was missing. No claw marks, no scuffs, no footprints. The mount was pristine. No animal had done this. It was the work of human hands. That was my breaking point. I skipped lunch, packed up, and began the trek back. My GPS said it would be about 6 hours to the ranger station, so I aimed to push straight through. About 2 miles in, the trail narrowed onto a rocky ridgeline with steep drop-offs on either side. In my peripheral vision, I caught something pacing below, maybe 50 feet down the slope. I stopped, and it stopped. I took another step. It mirrored mine. When I peered through the brush, I glimpsed a tall, shadowy figure weaving between the trees. That was enough. I scrambled down to my truck and didn't relax until the doors were locked. At the ranger station, I filed my report. My supervisor suggested it might be a squatter living off the grid and asked me to upload the footage. I handed over the mangled camera and showed them the recording of that crawling man, but nobody seemed concerned. Yet I couldn't shake the memory of how he moved, how he matched my pace without making a sound. A few weeks later, I checked footage from neighboring cameras just to see if there was any pattern. Most videos showed routine wildlife, until I found a clip from a trail about 6 miles west of my route. It was more disturbing. 3 mud-coated figures, all roughly the same build. They stood just outside the camera's infrared range. One of them stepped forward slowly, as though testing whether the camera could detect him, then crouched until his face was almost touching the lens. He tilted his head, pressing his ear against the housing, as if listening. He held that pose for a moment, then grinned, an impossibly wide, toothy grin that didn't look human. Instantly, the feed cut out. That camera, too, stopped transmitting. A week later, a tech went out to inspect it. Once again, the mount was intact, but the camera was gone. A few months passed, and I was quietly reassigned. No explanations, simply a note saying I was needed elsewhere. I didn't mention any of it, and neither did anyone else, until 2 weeks ago. I was waiting in line at an outdoor gear shop in Asheville, purchasing a new backpacking stove, when the man behind me asked about trails I'd done recently. We chatted, and I mentioned my work. Then he told me something that stopped my heart. He'd done a solo overnight at Fontana Lake, and in the middle of the night, he heard something crawling around his tent. No footsteps, just a rapid, jerky scuttling, circling his campsite for nearly an hour. He never saw them, but when dawn arrived, he found streaks of wet, brown mud all around his tent. I didn't say a word. I just paid and walked out. I haven't set foot in those mountains since,